John Miller moved through the gleaming corridors of Harrington Tech as if he were a shadow. It was 11:45 p.m., almost midnight, and the skyscraper was nearly silent, save for the hum of the elevators and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. To the world, this was just another janitor, pushing a cleaning cart, a man invisible against the backdrop of glass walls and marble floors. To John, it was the rhythm of survival, 12 hours of steady labor to keep a roof over his daughter's head. He was in his mid-30s, his shoulders broad from years of heavy work, but his posture carrying a quiet weariness. Every night shift was a trade hours of scrubbing and repairing so that Emma, his 7-year-old, could have a shot at a better life. Emma was asleep in the staff lounge on the 3rd floor, curled up on the same worn couch she always chose, her sketchbook open across her lap. She had drawn a castle earlier in the evening, with a princess in a crown and a man holding a mop like a sword. She loved to come along with her dad when babysitters fell through, and though John hated the idea of her growing up in a corporate tower after dark, he had no choice. She knew how to whisper in those long hallways, how to walk softly in her sneakers so she would not disturb executives staying late. To her, the building was a kingdom where her father was the quiet guardian. Few people knew that John had once been more than a janitor. Years earlier, he had worn the uniform of a systems engineer for the military. He had built networks, repaired communication systems, and kept entire operations running. A commendation for bravery still sat in a box at the back of his closet. But that part of his life was hidden now, buried under layers of grief and necessity. The cancer that had taken his wife had also stripped away his sense of future. The military career ended when he refused to sign off on equipment that might have killed his own men. Right did not pay the bills, and he had landed here, in the halls of Harrington Tech, scrubbing floors and tightening bolts where no one noticed him. High above John's nightly world, Olivia Harrington was fighting her own battles. At 34, she was the youngest female CEO in Silicon Valley, and every magazine cover called her the Ice Queen of Tech. She wore the title well, gliding through meetings in tailored suits, her words sharp and controlled. She was beautiful in the way that made her underestimated and brilliant in the way that made her feared. But behind the tinted windows of her chauffeured car, behind the security detail that shielded her from the world, Olivia lived in near total isolation. She had inherited Harrington Tech when it was bleeding money and transformed it into a $12 billion powerhouse. But the board never let her forget she was her father's daughter, not the seasoned executive they had wanted. Every misstep, every dip in stock value, was ammunition in their hands. Lately, whispers of a takeover had kept her awake until 2 or 3 in the morning, staring at reports on glowing screens, her eyes burning from exhaustion. She trusted no one, not even the men who had once been her father's closest allies. The company demanded her every breath, and in return, it offered only doubt. So the contrast stood stark. John, a janitor with no title on his uniform, earning $15 an hour to keep the lights on for his child. Olivia, a billionaire CEO stepping from black cars into glass towers, untouchable and yet deeply alone. Their worlds were separated by wealth, power, and perception, as if they existed on different planets orbiting the same city. Yet the walls of Harrington Tech contained both lives, and in those walls, their paths were already moving closer. John's nightly rounds would soon collide with Olivia's relentless fight to hold her empire together. Neither of them knew it yet, but fate was about to press them into the same story, a story where an invisible janitor and an untouchable CEO would discover just how fragile their worlds really were. The maintenance ticket came through at 12:23 a.m., marked urgent. A leak in the executive boardroom. John Miller rubbed his tired eyes and glanced toward the staff lounge, where Emma was asleep on the couch, her sketchbook sliding to the floor. He pulled his jacket tighter around her small shoulders before grabbing his tools. Being both father and worker meant he could never fully rest. He whispered to himself that she was safe, then stepped into the elevator that carried him toward the 40th floor. The boardroom felt like another universe. Rich mahogany walls, leather chairs, a table long enough to seat 20 people. John's boots squeaked faintly against the polished floor as he spotted the problem. A slow drip from the pipe above the adjoining restroom, water pooling on marble that probably cost more than his month's wages. He set down his cart, pulled out his wrench, and knelt beneath the conference table. His phone, old and stubborn, was still in his pocket. Earlier, he had been leaving a message for his sister about picking up Emma for the weekend. The call had ended, but the recorder kept running. He meant to shut it off, but the dripping pipe demanded his hands. He crouched low, tightening bolts. When the door beeped open, 2 men walked in, their footsteps heavy, their confidence louder than words. John stilled instantly. Years in the military had trained him to disappear when danger appeared. His breathing slowed. His hands froze on the wrench. From beneath the table, all he could see were polished Italian shoes and the faint glint of cufflinks. The voices were unmistakable. Thomas Rayburn, Senior Vice President of Operations, and Daniel Pierce, Senior Vice President of Technology. Both were trusted faces at Harrington Tech. At least, that was what everyone believed. Their conversation started casually, but the words cut sharper with each sentence. By 6 o'clock sharp, confidential files would be transferred overseas. The stock would crater before the market opened. Olivia Harrington would be ousted by noon. Thomas laughed at the brilliance of it, how everything would be pinned on her stubborn refusal to listen. Daniel added that the board would have no choice but to remove her once the breach became public. John's stomach clenched. He had heard battlefield plans less dangerous than this. His mind, trained years ago as a systems engineer, calculated the impact. Thousands of jobs gone, pensions erased, families destroyed. He thought of Emma asleep below, drawing castles while the floor above plotted ruin. Every instinct screamed to move, to run, but he remained frozen. His phone's small red light blinked inside his pocket, recording every word. The men continued, voices dripping with arrogance, even joking about where they would hide their bonuses. John pressed himself tighter against the floor, the weight of what he carried growing heavier with each second. At 12:41 a.m., the door shut behind them. Silence rushed back into the room. John's muscles ached from holding still, his breath ragged as he finally exhaled. He pulled the phone out and stopped the recording, staring at the screen. 43 minutes of audio. Proof of treachery. He closed his eyes. Evidence this powerful could save a company, or it could destroy him. No one would believe a janitor over 2 senior vice presidents. Worse, if they discovered his part in this, Emma would be in danger. He gripped the phone tighter, the weight of his choice sinking in. For the first time in years, he felt the familiar pull of duty, the one he thought he had left behind with his uniform. He was no longer just a janitor cleaning floors. He was the only witness to a plot in the dark. John's hand shook as he left the boardroom. His phone pressed tight in his pocket like a secret burning through fabric. He knew what he had captured. 43 minutes of treason whispered in leather chairs, enough to topple careers, enough to tear apart Harrington Tech if it reached the wrong ears. He could almost still hear their voices, dripping with arrogance, plotting as if thousands of families were pawns on a chessboard. He paused in the hallway, forcing his breath to steady. Then, did what his training had taught him long ago. Document everything. He pulled the maintenance ticket from his pouch and snapped a photo with his phone. Then he photographed the log showing the time he entered the boardroom. Proof that his presence had been official. He crouched to capture the water stains spreading across the marble, the reason he had been called there at all. His fingers moved with mechanical precision, careful and deliberate. Every detail mattered. Every timestamp could make the difference between being dismissed as a liar or standing as the only credible witness. Yet even as he worked, the doubts pressed in. Who would believe the janitor men like Thomas Rayburn and Daniel Pierce had spotless records, Ivy League degrees, and powerful friends, and he had none of that. Just a uniform with no name tag and a past no one cared about. His jaw tightened as the thought came unbidden. They will bury you. He rode the elevator down, each floor passing like a countdown. When the doors opened to the third floor, he walked toward the staff lounge, moving slower with every step. Inside, Emma slept soundly, her hair falling across her face, her small hands curled against her chest. Her drawings were scattered across the table. A princess, a dragon, a tall building with a rainbow above it. In the corner of one picture, written in her uneven letters, were the words, "Daddy fixes everything." John felt his chest tighten. She believed it. She believed that no matter how broken the world became, he could set it right. He sat on the edge of the couch, watching her breathe, and for a moment he was back in uniform, younger, standing in a desert tent with a report in his hand. His commanding officer had ordered him to approve faulty equipment. He had refused, knowing it could fail in combat. His refusal had ended his career, cost him his future, but it had saved the lives of men who never even knew the choice he made. That same steel rose in him now. He had not been brave for glory then, and he would not be brave for recognition now. It was duty, plain and unshakable. He brushed a strand of hair from Emma's face, kissed her forehead, and stood with a decision set deep in his bones. At 03:17 a.m., he sat at a terminal in a quiet corner of the building, his phone connected, files uploading with the steady rhythm of a soldier following procedure. He created multiple backups, sent copies to secure servers, and double-checked every step. When the confirmation code flashed on the screen, he memorized it. His career might be over by sunrise, but his integrity would not be. The janitor no one saw had chosen to act, and nothing would ever be the same again. The confirmation number still echoed in John's mind hours after he submitted the report. At 03:17 a.m., he had done what most in his position would never dare. By morning, his phone buzzed with a blocked call. The woman on the other end identified herself as senior legal counsel for Harrington Tech. Her tone was clipped, urgent, leaving no space for hesitation. They had reviewed his submission, but there was a problem. In the secure conference room where they met, 3 lawyers sat across from him, their suits crisp, their expressions heavy with calculation. They explained that Massachusetts was a 2-party consent state. Any recording made without the knowledge of both parties could be challenged in court. The evidence he had risked his life to capture might never hold up. The voicemail quirk of his outdated phone could be his salvation. But it was still a gray area. To succeed, they told him, they would need corroborating proof, something undeniable. John listened in silence, his jaw tight. He had already given more than he thought he could. But now they were asking him to step further into the fire. The lawyer leaned forward, her eyes sharp. He would have to keep working as if nothing had happened, gathering stronger evidence, drawing out the men he had overheard. He nodded once, not because it was easy, but because he knew there was no turning back. The following day brought a meeting he never expected. Olivia Harrington herself wanted to see him. When John entered the boardroom, the same room where his life had changed, she was standing by the tall windows, with her back to him. She turned slowly, her face as unreadable as the skyline beyond the glass. "So you're the janitor," she said flatly. "Yes, ma'am. They tell me you saved my company. I just reported what I heard. Her eyes lingered on him, cold, skeptical. Why would a man in your position risk everything? Why not take the money I'm sure they offered? Why not walk away? John's hands were steady, even as he felt the weight of her scrutiny. I want to keep my job. I want my daughter to be safe, and I want the people who work here to still have work on Monday. The words hung in the air, simple, unpolished, but undeniable. Olivia blinked, as if the language of integrity was foreign in her world of strategy and leverage. She studied him. This man in an ill-fitting uniform who should have been invisible, yet stood as the thin line between her empire and ruin. For the first time, a flicker of something passed across her face. Not warmth, not yet, but the beginning of respect. She straightened her shoulders, her voice softer but edged with steel. Then we have no choice. We will have to work together. John gave a short nod. He did not trust her, and she did not trust him. But both understood what was at stake. In that uneasy silence, a reluctant alliance was born, fragile as glass, yet strong enough to carry them into the storm ahead. The office was nearly empty that night, the kind of stillness that made even the air feel heavy. John was finishing a round on the lower floors while Emma sat at her small table in the lounge, crayons spread out in a mess of color. She hummed softly as she worked, her brow furrowed with the seriousness of an artist. Her latest creation showed a tall building, a man with a mop in one hand and a little girl by his side, and a woman with a crown perched on her head. Across the top, in big, uneven letters, she had written, "Boss Lady." Olivia Harrington arrived later than usual, her heels clicking across the marble. She was tired, her shoulders tight from another brutal meeting with the board. She expected silence, but instead, she found Emma bent over her drawing. For a moment, Olivia froze, unsure how to interact with a child in the middle of her fortress of glass and steel. Emma looked up, her eyes bright, and without hesitation held up her paper. "This is you," she said proudly. "You're the boss lady." The words hit Olivia harder than she expected. She blinked, studying the picture of herself wearing a crown, smiling in a way she rarely did in real life. For the first time in years, she felt something loosen in her chest. A laugh escaped her, small at first, then fuller, surprising even her. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her with admiration that wasn't tied to money or power. John watched from the doorway, leaning on his mop, caught between surprise and something he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. He had never seen Olivia soften before, never seen her let her guard down. But here she was, kneeling to Emma's level, asking questions about crayons and colors as if board meetings and stock charts did not exist. He realized then that Emma had reached a place he never could. She had walked straight through the icy walls that surrounded Olivia without even knowing they were there. The sight stirred something in him, the thought that maybe this cold and distant CEO was more than she let the world see. When Olivia finally stood, her expression was different, less rigid, more human. She looked at John briefly, as if to acknowledge that something unspoken had passed between them. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of something fragile, a thread connecting three lives that had been strangers only days before, a bond just starting to form, born in the simplest of ways, over crayons and a crown drawn by a little girl. The building was quiet at 11:30 p.m., the kind of silence that made every sound echo. John Miller was mopping the executive bathroom floor when the lock clicked shut behind him. He turned slowly, mop in hand, and found Marcus standing there in a $10,000 suit, his smile sharp and cold. They exchanged small talk at first, Marcus praising John's reliability, asking how long he had worked at Harrington Tech. Then he shifted, leaning against the counter with practiced ease. "A friend of mine needs someone like you," he said smoothly. Double your salary, full benefits, a college fund for your daughter. You wouldn't have to scrub floors anymore. John kept his face steady, though his heart pounded. He recognized the bait for what it was, a bribe wrapped in polished words. He gripped the mop tighter, lowering his eyes as if humbled, all the while knowing the wire beneath his shirt was transmitting every word to agents outside. Marcus's tone changed when John did not immediately agree. The smile faded, his voice dipped, and his words grew colder. Accidents happen in buildings this size. Pipes burst, elevators fail, people slip on wet floors. His eyes gleamed as he stepped closer. Little girls get approached by strangers at playgrounds. Tragic. Really. How dangerous the world has become. The air grew heavy. John's stomach twisted, but his face betrayed nothing. He forced himself to stay calm, to play the part of the quiet janitor who wanted no trouble. Inside, fury burned hotter than fear, but he swallowed it down. Emma's safety depended on his restraint. Marcus finally stepped back, satisfied with the unease he thought he had created. He adjusted his cufflinks, smiled again, and told John to think about the offer. Then he walked out, leaving the door to swing shut behind him. John let out a slow breath once he was alone, his hands trembling against the mop handle. He knew Marcus believed he had won, believed the threat was enough to silence him. What Marcus did not know was that every word had been recorded, every threat preserved. His fate was already sealed. The storm had passed, but the memory of it lingered. A week after the arrests, the employees of Harrington Tech gathered in the company courtyard, waiting for answers. Olivia Harrington stood on the stage, the weight of leadership etched into her posture. Yet when she spoke, her voice carried something new. She did not deliver numbers or corporate promises. She told the truth. A man earning $15 an hour, she said, had done more to save their company than executives making millions. She named John Miller, the janitor who risked everything for integrity, for his daughter, and for them. The crowd turned as John stepped forward with Emma at his side. For a moment he wanted to shrink back into the shadows. But then the applause began. It grew into a thunder that shook the air, a standing ovation not just for him, but for the quiet dignity of his choice. Emma clutched his hand tightly, her eyes wide as thousands of people cheered for her father. Olivia looked at them both, her expression softer than anyone had ever seen. The cold edge that once defined her was melting into something human. In the days that followed, offers poured in. Book deals, television appearances, lucrative jobs that would pay more than he had ever dreamed. John turned them down. Money was not the goal. What he wanted was stability, the chance to raise Emma without fear of losing time to empty pursuits. Olivia offered him a new role at Harrington Tech, one that bridged maintenance and security, $90,000 a year, full benefits, and flexible hours, so he could be there for his daughter. He accepted, not for prestige, but for peace. When Family Day arrived in late September, the parking lot was transformed into a carnival of food trucks, games, and laughter. John walked in with Emma, who insisted on wearing her princess dress. She carried a folded drawing in her hand. It showed 3 figures in front of a tall building, a man with a mop labeled Daddy, a small girl labeled Me, and a woman in a crown labeled Boss Lady. Emma presented it to Olivia with pride, and for the first time in years, Olivia laughed freely, touched in a place power had never reached. The day ended with the 3 of them sitting on a hay bale at the edge of the lot. Emma sipped cocoa, her dress wrinkled from playing, her cheeks flushed with joy. John sat beside her, feeling lighter than he had in years. Olivia joined them, her hair pulled back, her face calm in the golden glow of sunset. They did not speak much. They didn't need to. The silence was full, not empty. as the sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the sky in orange and purple. The three of them shared a moment that felt timeless. A janitor who had fixed more than pipes, a CEO who had learned to trust, and a little girl who believed her father could fix anything. It was not just an ending. It was a beginning. Proof that true heroes can rise from the humblest of places, and that integrity has the power to change not only a company but lives.